Section 35 of L'Assommoir. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. L'Assommoir by Emile Zola. Translated by Ernest A. Visitelli. Second part of Chapter VIII. You certainly would not be in our way, Gervaise ended by saying. We could so arrange things. No, thanks, repeated the Hatter. You're too kind. It would be asking too much. Coupeau could no longer restrain himself. Was he going to continue making objections when they told him it was freely offered? He would be obliging them. There, did he understand? Then in an excited tone of voice he yelled, Etienne, Etienne! The youngster had fallen asleep on the table. He raised his head with a start. Listen, tell him that you wish it. Yes, that gentleman there. Tell him as loud as you can. I wish it. I wish it, stuttered Etienne, his voice thick with sleep. Everyone laughed, but Lantier resumed his grave and impressive air. He squeezed Coupeau's hand across the table as he said, I accept. It's all in good fellowship on both sides, is it not? Yes, I accept, for the child's sake. The next day, when the landlord, Monsieur Marescot, came to spend an hour with the Boches, Gervaise mentioned the matter to him. He refused angrily at first. Then, after a careful inspection of the premises, particularly gazing upward to verify that the upper floors would not be weakened, he finally granted permission, on condition there would be no expense to him. He had the Coupeaus sign a paper saying they would restore everything to its original state on the expiration of the lease. Coupeau brought in some friends of his that very evening, a mason, a carpenter, and a painter. They would do this job in the evenings as a favor to him. Still, installing the door and cleaning up the room cost over 100 francs, not counting the wine that kept the work going. Coupeau told his friends he'd pay them something later, out of the rent from his tenant. Then the furniture for the room had to be sorted out. Gervaise left Mother Coupeau's wardrobe where it was and added a table and 2 chairs taken from her own room. She had to buy a washing stand and a bed with mattress and bedclothes, costing 130 francs, which she was to pay off at 10 francs a month. Although Lantier's 20 francs would be used to pay off these debts for 10 months, there would be a nice little profit later. It was during the early days of June that the Hatter moved in. The day before, Coupeau had offered to go with him and fetch his box, to save him the 30 sous for a cab. But the other became quite embarrassed, saying that the box was too heavy, as though he wished up to the last moment to hide the place where he lodged. He arrived in the afternoon towards 3 o'clock. Coupeau did not happen to be in, and Gervaise, standing at the shop door, became quite pale on recognizing the box outside the cab. It was their old box, the one with which they had journeyed from Plassans, all scratched and broken now and held together by cords. She saw it return as she had often dreamt it would, and it needed no great stretch of imagination to believe that the same cab, that cab in which that strumpet of a burnisher had played her such a foul trick, had brought the box back again. Meanwhile, Boche was giving Lantier a helping hand. The laundress followed them in silence and feeling rather dazed. When they had deposited their burden in the middle of the room, she said, for the sake of saying something, "Well, that's a good thing finished, isn't it?" Then pulling herself together, seeing that Lantier, busy in undoing the cords, was not even looking at her, she added, "Monsieur Boche, you must have a drink." And she went and fetched a quart of wine and some glasses. Just then Poisson passed along the pavement in uniform. She signalled to him, winking her eye and smiling. The policeman understood perfectly. When he was on duty and anyone winked their eye to him, it meant a glass of wine. He would even walk for hours up and down before the laundry, waiting for a wink. Then, so as not to be seen, he would pass through the courtyard and toss off the liquor in secret. Ah, said Lantier when he saw him enter. It's you, Badingue. He called him Badingue for a joke, just to show how little he cared for the Emperor. Poisson put up with it in his stiff way, without one knowing whether it really annoyed him or not. Besides, the two men, though separated by their political convictions, had become very good friends. "You know that the Emperor was once a policeman in London," said Boche in his turn. "Yes, on my word. He used to take the drunken women to the station house." Gervaise had filled 3 glasses on the table. She would not drink herself, she felt too sick at heart. But she stood there longing to see what the box contained, and watching Lantier remove the last cords. Before raising the lid, Lantier took his glass and clinked it with the others. "Good health." "Same to you," replied Boche and Poisson. The laundress filled the glasses again. The 3 men wiped their lips on the backs of their hands. And at last the hatter opened the box. It was full of a jumble of newspapers, books, old clothes and underlinen in bundles. He took out successively a saucepan, a pair of boots, a bust of Le Tru Rollin with the nose broken, an embroidered shirt and a pair of working trousers. Gervaise could smell the odor of tobacco, and that of a man whose linen wasn't too clean, one who took care only of the outside, of what people could see. The old hat was no longer in the left corner. There was a pin cushion she did not recognize, doubtless a present from some woman. She became calmer, but felt a vague sadness as she continued to watch the objects that appeared, wondering if they were from her time or from the time of others. "I say, Bedingue, do you know this?" resumed Lantier. He thrust under his nose a little book printed at Brussels. The Amours of Napoleon III, illustrated with engravings. It related, among other anecdotes, how the Emperor had seduced a girl of 13, the daughter of a cook, and the picture represented Napoleon III, bare-legged, and also wearing the grand ribbon of the Legion of Honor, pursuing a little girl who was trying to escape his lust. "Ah, that's it exactly!" exclaimed Boche, whose slyly ridiculous instincts felt flattered by the sight. "It always happens like that." Poisson was seized with consternation, and he could not find a word to say in the Emperor's defense. It was in a book, so he could not deny it. Then Lantier, continuing to push the picture under his nose in a jeering way, he extended his arms and exclaimed, "Well, so what?" Lantier didn't reply. He busied himself arranging his books and newspapers on a shelf in the wardrobe. He seemed upset not to have a small bookshelf over his table, so Gervaise promised to get him one. He had The History of 10 Years by Louis Blanc, except for the first volume, Lamartine's The Girondins in installments, The Mysteries of Paris, and The Wandering Jew by Eugène Sue, and a quantity of booklets on philosophic and humanitarian subjects, picked up from used book dealers. His newspapers were his prized possessions, a collection made over a number of years. Whenever he read an article in a cafe that seemed to him to agree with his own ideas, he would buy that newspaper and keep it. He had an enormous bundle of them, papers of every date and every title, piled up in no discernible order. He patted them and said to the other 2, "You see that? No one else can boast of having anything to match it. You can't imagine all that's in there. I mean, if they put into practice only half the ideas, it would clean up the social order overnight. That would be good medicine for your Emperor and all his stool pigeons." The policeman's red moustache and beard began to bristle on his pale face, and he interrupted. "And the army, tell me, what are you going to do about that?" Lantier flew into a passion. He banged his fists down on the newspapers as he yelled, "I require the suppression of militarism, the fraternity of peoples. I require the abolition of privileges, of titles, and of monopolies. I require the equality of salaries, the division of benefits, the glorification of the protectorate. All liberties, do you hear? All of them. And divorce." "Yes, yes, divorce for morality," insisted Boche. Poisson had assumed a majestic air. "Yet if I won't have your liberties, I'm free to refuse them," he answered. Lantier was choking with passion. "If you don't want them, he replied. "No, you're not free at all. If you don't want them, I'll send you off to Devil's Island. Yes, Devil's Island with your emperor and all the rats of his crew." They always quarrelled thus every time they met. Gervaise, who did not like arguments, usually interfered. She roused herself from the torpor into which the sight of the box, full of the stale perfume of her past love, had plunged her, and she drew the three men's attention to the glasses. "Ah, yes," said Lantier, becoming suddenly calm and taking his glass. "Good health." "Good health," replied Boche and Poisson, clinking glasses with him. Boche, however, was moving nervously about, troubled by an anxiety as he looked at the policeman out of the corner of his eye. "All this between ourselves, eh, Monsieur Poisson?" murmured he at length. "We say and show you the things to show off." But Poisson did not let him finish. He placed his hand upon his heart as though to explain that all remained buried there. He certainly did not go spying about on his friends. Coupeau arriving, they emptied a second quart. Then the policeman went off by way of the courtyard and resumed his stiff and measured tread along the pavement. At the beginning of the new arrangement, the entire routine of the establishment was considerably upset. Lantier had his own separate room, with his own entrance and his own key. However, since they had decided not to close off the door between the rooms, he usually came and went through the shop. Besides, the dirty clothes were an inconvenience to Gervaise, because her husband never made the case he had promised, and she had to tuck the dirty laundry into any odd corner she could find. They usually ended up under the bed, and this was not very pleasant on warm summer nights. She also found it a nuisance having to make up Etienne's bed every evening in the shop. When her employees worked late, the lad had to sleep in a chair until they finished. Goujet had mentioned sending Etienne to Lille, where a machinist he knew was looking for apprentices. As the boy was unhappy at home and eager to be out on his own, Gervaise seriously considered the proposal. Her only fear was that Lantier would refuse. Since he had come to live with them solely to be near his son, surely he wouldn't want to lose him only 2 weeks after he moved in. However, he approved wholeheartedly when she timidly broached the matter to him. He said that young men needed to see a bit of the country. The morning that Etienne left, Lantier made a speech to him, kissed him, and ended by saying, "Never forget that a working man is not a slave, and that whoever is not a working man is a lazy drone." The household was now able to get into the new routine. Gervaise became accustomed to having dirty laundry lying all around. Lantier was forever talking of important business deals. Sometimes he went out, wearing fresh linen and neatly combed. He would stay out all night, and on his return pretend that he was completely exhausted because he had been discussing very serious matters. Actually, he was merely taking life easy. He usually slept until 10. In the afternoons, he would take a walk if the weather was nice. If it was raining, he would sit in the shop reading his newspaper. This atmosphere suited him. He always felt at his ease with women and enjoyed listening to them. Lantier first took his meals at François', on the corner of the Rue des Poissonniers. But of the 7 days in the week, he dined with the Coupeaus on 3 or 4. So much so that he ended by offering to board with them and to pay them 15 francs every Saturday. From that time he scarcely ever left the house, but made himself completely at home there. Morning to night he was in the shop, even giving orders and attending to customers. Lantier didn't like the wine from François, so he persuaded Gervaise to buy her wine from Vigouroux, the coal dealer. Then he decided that Coudeloup's bread was not baked to his satisfaction, so he sent Augustine to the Viennese bakery on the Faubourg Poissonnier for their bread. He changed from the grocer Le Hongre, but kept the butcher, Fat Charles, because of his political opinions. After a month, he wanted all the cooking done with olive oil. Clémence joked that with a Provençal like him you could never wash out the oil stains. He wanted his omelettes fried on both sides, as hard as pancakes. He supervised Mother Coupeau's cooking, wanting his steaks cooked like shoe leather and with garlic on everything. He got angry if she put herbs in the salad. "They're just weeds, and some of them might be poisonous," he declared. His favourite soup was made with overboiled vermicelli. He would pour in half a bottle of olive oil. Only he and Gervaise could eat this soup, the others being too used to Parisian cooking. Little by little, Lantier also came to mixing himself up in the affairs of the family. As the Lorilleuxs always grumbled at having to part with the 5 francs for Mother Coupeau, he explained that an action could be brought against them. They must think that they had a set of fools to deal with. It was 10 francs a month which they ought to give. And he would go up himself for the 10 francs, so boldly and yet so amiably that the chainmaker never dared refuse them. Madame Lerat also gave 2 5-franc pieces now. Mother Coupeau could have kissed Lantier's hands. He was, moreover, the grand arbiter in all the quarrels between the old woman and Gervaise. Whenever the laundress, in a moment of impatience, behaved roughly to her mother-in-law, and the latter went and cried on her bed, he hustled them about and made them kiss each other, asking them if they thought themselves amusing with their bad tempers. End of second part of Chapter VIII. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.